When you look at the vast plains of Africa today, you see a peaceful and beautiful world filled with endless natural landscape. Golden grass stretching far into the distance, blue skies above, and wild animals moving freely across the open plains make this place truly breathtaking. But thousands of years ago, this same land was a dangerous and challenging place for human beings. This was a time when humans were not the masters of nature, but only a small part of the much larger natural world. Every single day, survival depended on understanding the weather, the animals, and the rules of the wilderness around them. Across these vast grasslands, lions roamed freely, leopards hunted from hidden places, and droughts made life extremely difficult. There were no modern homes, no security systems, and no easy resources available to make human life comfortable. Humans had only their knowledge, their courage, and the strength of their community to survive. And in this harsh world, a unique society developed that did not try to defeat nature. Instead, they learned to understand nature and created a way of life that allowed them to live alongside it. This is the story of the Maasai people, a community that built its life across the wild landscapes of East Africa for thousands of years. But the question is, how did the early Maasai survive in such a dangerous and unpredictable world? How did they protect their families while facing lions, droughts, and countless challenges of the wilderness? How did their culture develop and continue to survive until the present day? To understand this story, we must travel far back into the past, back to a time when the African plains had no cities, no roads, and humans depended completely on nature. The history of the Maasai is connected to the vast regions of East Africa, where the grasslands of modern Kenya and Tanzania exist today. This land was as beautiful as it was difficult for humans to survive. Sometimes heavy rains transformed the earth into a green paradise, while long droughts completely changed the entire landscape. People had to travel great distances in search of water. To keep their animals alive, they constantly searched for new lands and fresh grazing areas. The Maasai learned to understand this harsh environment and created their entire lifestyle around it. They learned how to read the changing seasons. They learned how to recognize the land and understand its hidden signs. They learned how animals behaved and how nature changed around them. And this knowledge became their greatest strength. In Maasai society, the most important thing was their cattle, especially their cows, which became the center of their entire way of life. For the Maasai people, cows were not just a source of food or wealth. They represented their identity, their respect, and the foundation of their survival. The number of cattle a family owned often showed their social position within the community. Cows provided milk, food, and support during the hardest moments of life. But the relationship between the Maasai and their cattle was not only based on necessity. They respected their cows and considered them a sacred part of their existence. The Maasai believed that their god Enkai had given them the responsibility of caring for cattle. Therefore, protecting their animals was not just a job, but a religious and spiritual responsibility. But owning cattle alone was not enough to survive in the harsh and unpredictable lands of Africa. Across the vast African plains, the greatest challenge was finding enough water and food for themselves and their animals, because nature never remained the same throughout the year. Sometimes the grasslands were full of life, covered with fresh green vegetation and abundant resources, and sometimes long periods of drought completely transformed the entire landscape. When the grass disappeared from one area, the Maasai moved forward with their cattle in search of new land. When water sources dried up, they began searching for places where life could continue. Their existence was never tied to a single permanent location. They moved according to the rhythm and movement of nature. They understood which areas were safe at different times of the year. They knew where their cattle would find enough food, and they knew where water could be found in the coming days. This knowledge did not come from written books or formal education. It was passed down through generations through experience, observation, and survival. The Maasai called their villages bomas. These were small circular settlements where families, children, and cattle lived together. Strong walls made from thorny bushes surrounded these settlements. These barriers were not just boundaries around their home. They were protective shields against the dangers that arrived after sunset. Because when the sun disappeared over the African plains, the peaceful world suddenly changed. The same land that looked beautiful during the day became a dangerous territory of predators at night. During daylight, the plains were filled with movement, life, and natural beauty. But after darkness arrived, the same landscape became a hunting ground. As night spread across the land, lions began moving in search of their prey. Leopards waited silently among trees and tall grass, watching for the right moment to attack, and hyenas moved in groups, searching across the darkness for their next meal. In such a dangerous world, fire became one of the most important companions of the Maasai people. Fire was not just a source of light during the dark nights, it created a feeling of safety against the unknown dangers outside. It provided warmth during the cold nights of the African plain, and it brought the entire community together around one place. When people gathered around the fire at night, They were not only preparing for protection. Those moments became a time for sharing stories and passing knowledge. Elders shared their experiences and wisdom with the younger generation. They taught children how to understand the wilderness around them. They explained which animals could become dangerous. They showed them which paths were safer to travel, and they taught them how to survive in a world full of challenge. In Maasai society, young people entered a very important stage of life. It was the time when they prepared to become warriors. These young warriors were known as Moran. But becoming a Moran was not only about showing strength and courage, it was about accepting responsibility for the entire community. A Moran had to protect his people from danger. He had to protect and guard the cattle. He had to travel across difficult landscapes and long distances. And he had to understand every sign that nature provided. Because in that ancient world, physical strength alone could not guarantee survival. Correct knowledge and wise decisions were equally important for staying alive. The life of the Maasai was not only filled with struggle and hardship. Their society also valued music, dancing, and storytelling. Their songs were not created only for entertainment. They were a way to preserve memories, traditions, and history, because in those times, written books and records did not exist. Their culture survived through spoken words passed from one generation to another. When an elder told stories to children, they were not only sharing old events, they were teaching them who they were and where they came from. They were explaining how their ancestors lived in the past, and they were showing how deeply their people were connected with nature. Every story carried an important lesson, every song carried a piece of their history, but time never remains the same forever. Slowly, the world around the Maasai began to change. During the 19th century, European powers arrived in Africa. After their arrival, the shape of lands and borders began to transform. New political boundaries were created across traditional territory. New systems and rules were introduced. And in many areas, the traditional grazing lands of the Maasai became smaller. Places where their cattle once moved freely now had new restrictions and boundaries. Their traditional way of life slowly began to change. But even after facing countless challenges, the Maasai never lost their identity. They learned how to adapt themselves to a changing world. Today, the Maasai people are also a part of the modern world. Many Maasai people are receiving education and exploring new opportunities. Many are connected with businesses and modern professions. Some Maasai people now live in cities and urban area, but their ancient traditions are still alive. Their responsibility toward their community, their respect for their animals, and their deep connection with nature. These values continue to define their identity even today. The story of the Maasai reminds us of an ancient truth about human survival. Humans do not always move forward by changing nature. Sometimes they survive and grow by understanding nature. Thousands of years ago, when the African plains had no modern facilities, when there were no machines to make life easier, when there were no protected cities for safety, the Maasai stood strong through knowledge, courage, and community. They lived among lions and faced the dangers of the wild. They survived through the endless challenges of dry and harsh landscape. They raised generations beneath the endless African sky. They never considered the wilderness their enemy. They considered it their home. And perhaps that is why, even after thousands of years of change, the story of the Maasai continues to fascinate the entire world.